hope you can hear me. You guys are all here for the ICWA panel. I don't want to wait too long because 45 minutes goes real quick. And we've got some great folks up here ready to share a whole bunch of information with you. I'm Rebecca Stratton. I'm the Secretary Treasurer for the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community. I'm going to moderate today's panel. So we'll just dive right in, and I'm going to let each of the panelists introduce themselves.
Okay, Miigwech, Rebecca, thank you for all sharing some of your schedule with us. I know you're busy, and we appreciate it. I don't talk very fast, but I'll do the best I can here this afternoon. But my name is Farron Jackson Sr. I'm currently the Leash Lake Tribal Chairman since 2016. I've been blessed with being a foster parent for over 30 years now, and through the process here, through Hennepin County and some other counties that we did foster care in, me and my wife, we adopted 5 children into our home as our adopted family. So I don't even like to call them adopted family members. It's like feel like they're just like our biological children today. So, and they're doing really well, you know, so I just want to, I'll be here to answer any kind of questions that I can, and you know, and I don't claim to be an expert on the ICWA law, but I've understood the law. I've read the law many times. I've advocated for myself and my family fairly well in the 30 years that I've been a foster parent, and you know, it means something. You know that the law was established for reasons, and I think at this point, I think we'll just go through the introductions and we'll get on to the, to the conversation more specifically. Miigwech.
Bonjour, mi gona gabo ikwain indigenous cause magazine and duadam guava bigani cognin dunjaba nimin wenda mama yaya nongum. Hello everyone, my name is Lori York, and my current role is Executive Director at White Earth Nation, and my experience, my background includes 10 years of social work for White Earth Nation as a child protection social worker and 5 years as a director of Indian Child Welfare. I've also been the American Indian Child Welfare Advisory Council co-chair since 2016. That is, I'm still in that same current role today. And I really have to say that, my educational background includes Bachelor of Science in Social Work and a Bachelor of Arts in Indian Studies, but really what taught me this knowledge that I have today is working with their children and families directly. And it was during that time when I was boots on the ground, got to see the gaps in the services. I got to see, how cases can be successful. I got to see reunification. I was able to see how our culture and our language influence the success of those cases. And one thing that I had committed in that experience is that all of those pains that I seen in that journey, that I would do my best to elevate that voice in the area of child welfare and make a difference. Miigwech.
Bonjour, Anin, Cathy Chavers, Indigenous Cause Ogamakwe. I am Chairwoman of the Bois Forte Band and also President of the Minnesota Chippewa Tribe. I have 30 plus years of healthcare administration plus human services administration working for Bois Forte. I've also, from an administrative side, worked with the budgeting and funding processes for Indian child welfare, and I really am passionate about it because it involves our children. I was an emergency placement back in the day for foster care, and I've had kids come back and say, I remember being at your home, and they're doing very well now, and that's really a good positive thing to hear. But I also want to be a voice for Indian child welfare because there's so much out there that needs to be told and needs to be heard, and I'm that voice for Indian child welfare. Miigwech.
Thank you, everybody. This is a big topic. The ICWA, it's a big thing. It's a big deal, and it's hard to really boil it all down into 45 minutes. But I think one of the main things as Native people, a lot of times we have to do Indian 101 and rehash kind of this whole history before we can get to, the issue at hand. And I think in your experience dealing with ICWA, what are some of the things that you think our legislators in the room really need to understand so that we can work together to move forward to protect and provide services for our Native children in the state?
Well, I would like to.
Go ahead.
So I think it's really critical and important that we have language revitalization efforts so we can continue on with our songs, our language, our identity, and have our culturally specific services supported and sustainable. And if we had sustainable access and resources to those culturally specific services that work for our children and families, we can do a lot of prevention work on the front side of things. And one thing that I think is really important, for every time there's a placement, that is lifelong trauma. It is lifelong trauma. Cannot stress that enough. So when we're making those really critical decisions, when a child goes into placement, we have to remember that's lifelong trauma. So our focus is to always work on the front end of that. What can we do and how can we help our families? How can we be supportive? What prevention services can we put into place at the front end? If we're going to, and I want to make really clear, I'm very thankful for our foster parents, and I say this in a very respectful way. If we're going to put funding towards the cost of foster care placement, why are we not focusing that same amount of funding towards the prevention efforts to the families to help them address disparities and help support them in protecting our natural resources and creating and supporting that sustainability that provides for us?
I guess, Farron, if you don't mind.
No, go
Okay.
right ahead.
I guess what I'd like to talk about, when I work in healthcare, prevention is key. That solves a lot of issues up front if you try to do prevention. And I like what Lori said here about the prevention with the disparities, because the families are dealing with a lot of issues, historical trauma, drugs. We have grandmas taking care of grandchildren. Bois, Forte, and other tribes, Indigenous people are communal people. And a typical family on a reservation is different than a typical family off the reservation. We have cousins, aunts, uncles, everybody living in our homes. And our homes, I've seen actually where county workers will come into the homes and say, oh my God, this home is dirty. We're not the white picket fence, spotless homes like they are on the off the reservation. My sister used to do that to me. I hated it. She went through my room with a white glove. I'm not that kind of person. But anyway, our homes are different because we have all these people. We bring in everybody if they need help. And it's a lot different. Sometimes the dishes don't get done. Sometimes the vacuuming doesn't get done. But that doesn't mean that we're dirty. It just means we're busy, we've got a lot to do, and we're very communal people. We take care of everybody in our family. Our family is not just brother, sister, mom and dad. It's everybody. We take in our grandchildren, nieces. So that broad spectrum, and again, the 101, our county people need to be trained on Indigenous families. And what does an Indigenous home look like? It's not the same. They're like night and day. They're totally different. And our values sometimes are different. We've got our grandfather's 7 teachings that we use, a cultural way of teaching our kids. And, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but we know how to take care of ourselves and we know how to take care of our kids. Give us a chance to do that, but also recognize that, sometimes it doesn't fit within the norm of what the county sees or what other people see, but it works for us. Miigwech.
Okay, I'll talk quick here. I just, like I said, our family experienced out-of-home placement too. Came from a family of 9. And I think I told this story, I don't know if it was in the same room before, but these things are hard to talk about. They're very sensitive, and it's traumatizing talking about, experiences that families live through firsthand. It's almost like trying to have a combat veteran tell you the story about what it was for him to be in a war. It's things they don't like to talk about. It's things they're trying to forget about, actually. But, but for educational purposes, tribal leaders will talk about these things. When we were younger, we were living on the reservation, and our parents had some alcohol problems, and that caused us to be removed from the home. Me and my older sister, we were all a year apart, and we were able to get placed with grandma up in Red Lake for, when we were like 6 and 7 years old. My two younger brothers right behind us were like 3 and 4 years old at the time, and they got taken, put in out-of-home placement, and they went through these little farm towns. They always try to keep them together, but in different instances, they were separated. And my brother would tell me these stories where they'd be in these farm homes, and one time they tried to run away. They were like 5 and 6 years old. He said, we were gonna run away. And he says when they went to bed that night, they were gonna try to open up their bedroom windows, and their bedroom windows were all crisscrossed with chicken barbed wire fencing. Yeah, I said, really? He goes, yeah, it was all, we remember that. You can remember traumatizing things when you're young. I remember when I fell in a well when I was 6 years old and I almost drowned. I still remember that today, and I'm gonna be 68. These things will never go away. You'll always have that memory there, but these are some of the stories that a lot of families could tell, and, to get somebody an education, a perspective on what families go through. Another thing I would like to see, looked at too, is the rights of our parents. Their TPR rights are TPR'd so quick before they can really get their life back in order. It used to be 6 months. I don't know if it's a year now. Sometimes, families need a little longer like that to get their lives back in order instead of taking their rights away in such a quick time frame. Another thing that's also concerning too is the 87 counties in Minnesota. Most of them are still out of ICWA compliance today. They're not abiding by a federal law, and this is really serious to the tribes. If you turn it around the other way, and if the tribes were out of violations or out of compliance with a federal law, the old bloody hell would happen. So these things have to be looked at seriously by the legislation and who's ever in charge of with DHS. These counties are obligated to get in compliance with this federal law.
I'd just like to add, before we wrap up with that question, is the other thing to consider for tribes is that we have ICWA cases throughout the United States.
Yep.
So it's beyond just the state of Minnesota. And this is really important to everybody that has supported and passed the Minnesota Indian Family Preservation Act, because now we can model this as something that could potentially be used throughout the United States to protect our children everywhere else. I think that's really critical and important to remember, is all of those that aren't protected in the state of Minnesota, where we can be supportive and hopefully extend those protections to them as well.
Thank you for that. Speaking of the Minnesota Indian Family Preservation Act, Minnesota's come a long way, and that was passed last week, wasn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, so congratulations and thank you all for that work and everybody that went into that. Just thinking about ICWA and how long it's been in place, and the previous version of MIFPA that we have here in Minnesota, despite those measures, our relatively small population, we're still overrepresented in the system here in Minnesota, and Minnesota is actually one of the worst states across the country for our children in the system, despite these laws on the books. So I guess my question to the panelists is, what are some of your suggestions to reduce that disparity here in Minnesota?
So some of our attempts was, we did come forward, the American Indian Child Welfare Advisory Council came forward with the recommendation to support the Tribal Training Certification Partnership program out of the University of Minnesota Duluth. And what that did was allowed culturally specific teachings in the area of child welfare to understand the spirit and the intent of ICWA and MIFPA. And that training is available to all of the child protection social workers. They did a partnership with the Guardian Ad Litem program to ensure that the Guardian Ad Litem program was trained the same, and also the Children's Justice Initiative with Justice Ann McKeag in those efforts. So for the first time, we've had training for ICWA compliance in the areas of the social workers, the Guardian Ad Litems, the judges and attorneys. And if you can have all of those systems compliant and being trained on the same understanding of what is ICWA and what is MIFPA, eventually we will see those results change. That's one area. Another area that we would like to see in the future is law enforcement to be trained as well, which is also in the OLA report. It was said to child welfare, child protection, but specifically on Indian child welfare and the importance of that prevention work, since they're a decision maker in those out-of-home placements and those decision points. So that would be an effort that the state could do towards ensuring that there's compliance. That, and if we could have the education system have a requirement one day, hopefully regarding this federal law, and also not only for the social workers, but all of those areas that I had just described, Guardian Ad Litem, social workers, judges, attorneys across the board, so everybody's on the same page at the same time.
I guess what I'd like to say is that, again, prevention is key. More funding for families rather than removing the children. Let's work with the families. It's going to take time. And like Farron mentioned, 6 months, even a year sometimes, that's not long enough. The issues we're dealing with now have been the drug epidemic, the meth. It doesn't go away like we think it does. It takes months, sometimes years for people to deal with their addiction. Addiction is an illness. And I think with helping these families, by trying to help them keep the kids in the home, but also recognizing that when you're dealing with placement, that, sometimes placement with relatives is the way it should be automatically for Indian children, because like I said, we're all one family, we're communal. And sometimes our grandparents aren't old enough to take care of the kids, but maybe an aunt or uncle is. But the other part is funding for our social workers. And I just want to say social workers across the board, and especially Native American social workers. At Bois Forte, we have a caseload per person of 60 per caseload. And that's across the country. That's not just in Minnesota. And one person per 60 caseloads. That's unreal. And right now, we can't get people to work. People don't want to work as social workers. We all know there's a workforce issue. We all know there's that. But to have these people, and we have Angela, our ICWA person, has been in there forever, and she's going to retire in 2 years. I don't know what we're going to do without her. It's that institutional knowledge. But also, I feel very bad for her because of all the things she's had to look at throughout the years with child abuse, neglect, and everything else. But, if we can work with our families more funding down the tube for social workers and even the counties. We have up in St. Louis County, we have a quarterly meeting with probation, with ICWA, with St. Louis County workers, where they meet and discuss cases and try to come to a common ground on how to help this. But yet what really appalls me is this federal law has been in place since 1978. 1978, I was a young kid then. And we have the highest rate on out-of-home placement. The highest rate, the worst in the nation, I think. And it just, something's wrong, something's not working, so let's take a different look, a different aspect at it and try to figure it out. But I really think that tribes can be at the table and figure it out because we've done it for years. So I guess open ears for what we think might work, cultural. The culture needs to be inundated in that system because that's what works, our cultural ways. So I'd like to see more of that. Miigwech.
And I think one thing I want to say, sorry, Fran, Minnesota's statute 260C should be looked at, and that's where we can change it to be more preventative work and really take a deep dive into that statute. And then also to work collaboratively on the paperwork reduction so we can have better services to our family in a more timely way. And then also to take a peek at the way data is collected here.
Yes.
Because Minnesota is holding and has a compliance, which other states don't. So we don't know, when we compare those statistics, if there's no compliance within that state, how are we comparing those statistics as well? Which.
Okay, yeah, I just want to touch on a little bit too here. I know, me and Lori, I believe we were at the Paradise Cove over at TI there in 2018, and we had meetings with Judge McKaig on how we strengthen the ICWA law, and it was good discussion. There was a lot of knowledgeable individuals were there, and we had a lot of good opinions comments that we had put on the bulletin board, and I think we're continuing with that as well. But it's just, education is key to everything we do. And even in all our counties, both native and non-native caseworkers to understand and kind of meeting our families where they're at. We had a case here a couple years ago and up in Cass County, and it was a foster home family that was in a LaPorte, and I won't mention any names, but she called me up, grandma calls me up and was crying, and she was taking care of two of her her grandchildren in a 2-bedroom trailer, and she had her other children. She had a big family, to say, and they spent the weekend in there. And then Monday morning, when she was going to drive the kids home, she had an in-house visit from a caseworker from the county, and the county worker came over there. And our families get a little nervous when you have caseworkers come to your home. It's because it kind of likes, they're always trying to look for something, not what you're doing right, but something that you're doing wrong. And that was the case there. And she keeps a very clean house, because I go visit with her too. Always has food in the refrigerator and a pantry and all that. And the caseworker came that morning at 9, she says, and was looking around her house there and started asking all these questions and, kind of making somebody feel very uncomfortable with the home visit. And she asked her, she goes, "How come you have so many boots over there by your door?" She said, "Well, I had my 4 other granddaughters spend the night, and we had a pizza party, we watched movies, and so she was kind of looking for something to maybe start some kind of legal action on her." And he kept asking that, and "Whose car is that out there in the driveway with the hood up?" "Oh, that was my grandson's. He kind of broke down here." "And does he live with you?" "No." "And okay, who's large?" All these little things, and he left his jacket there he was working on. The work jacket was hanging up on a coat rack by the back door. Did he have a background check? That was her grandson. So all these little things that they were doing. And then when she went back to her office, she called and she was going to have them 2 granddaughters move because they said their house was unsafe because it was over capacity. Just little things like that. So then she called me, and then I got involved with our ICWA director, and I was telling him all that, and he goes, "Well, that's kind of odd." And I said, "Yeah, odd things happen. That's the way our kids get taken out of these homes, and it's not right." She explained everything, and the caseworker had her own conclusion on things, and they were trying to remove the kids. And I said, "I don't want these kids taken out of the home. It's the last thing I want. That's what we're trying to get away from. Grandma's taking care of these kids." So it was a big, long legal battle, and our ICWA worker had to call the Cass County worker and let them know chairman didn't want these kids removed, and it got to a jurisdiction issue. But thank God, like I said earlier, we made good relationship building with Cass County, and the commissioner called me up, and we had a long talk, and he said, "Okay, well, I understand where you're coming from, and the kids won't be removed." So, good things can happen, but it's through communication and educating each other on our cultural differences.
I think that's a good point and a good transition to think about. There are things going well. There are caseworkers out there that look for the positive and not just the negative. And I think there's a lot of opportunities. And I, from your perspective, what are the opportunities we have to better collaborate with the state, to better beef up programs, to better serve the needs of our Indian families across Minnesota? I'm looking at you because you keep diving in first.
Go ahead, you're first. Go ahead.
Well, So the question is, so I think we kind of talked about that already a little bit, is having that compliance and coming together and learning and educating one another, but also to be supportive and having that understanding that, not only do the county social workers struggle with the paperwork reduction, so do the tribal social workers. And when we come together and find that commonality, then we can collaboratively work together on which areas do we need to, bring this and elevate this concern forward, and how do we find that solution? But a lot of times it's just sitting down with the counties and having conversations and be educated with one another on what it's like in the workforce. And just like Ms. Chavers had said here, Chairwoman Chavers, I couldn't think of Chairwoman. Chairwoman Chavers had said, this is, you see high caseloads and high turnaround for social workers. And really the thing is that what the social workers experience going through that field of social work is that you can never pay them enough money. That is, and the reason why I say that is because that is lifelong trauma for each social worker that has done their job as well. And that's not ever talked about. Or, and so it's really important that we be mindful of those things, and that we are supportive and taking care and making sure that our workers are okay too. And I think that goes across the board for any social worker, not just ICWA social workers, but all social workers. And one of the bigger things is like a lot of disparities in poverty and environmental factors all fall on the social workers. Go to the home, you fix it, find out, help the family. It's a collaborative effort. We need efforts from chemical dependency and behavior health and education and employment across the board, public safety. So if y'all want to be helpful and supportive, it would be to support tribal programming. It would be to listen to tribes on what works for our people. Oftentimes when I read educational books, it talks about things that Indigenous people have been doing for a number of years, and it was just like, hey, we realize in 1991 that placement of children creates trauma. Indian Child Welfare Act was passed in 1978. We said the same exact thing, and I say that in a good way, but to have open mind and to listen when the tribal folks come forward to say, hey, this is what works for our people, this is where we need to be supported, and if we can all collaboratively work together, that helps create those relationships. MIFBA is a great example this year of being passed of how the counties, the tribes, and everybody came together on that. Say, hey, what can we agree on? What can we do? How can we protect our children? Because we all have the same common goal, right? And that was a good way of showing how we can work together. Rich?
I think too that, when she mentioned the paperwork reduction, modifications or simplifications for processes and procedures for this would be very helpful, because there's so many hurdles, so many documents, so many things that take time, and sometimes time is not a factor. I mean, you've got a child in emergency placement that's been there for, a month, trying to find a home for them where, that type of child needs stability. Those kids need stability. That's the one thing I see, is kids being moved around or being taken from homes, or this one isn't working, whatever. And so the kids need stability, modifications or simplifications to processes and procedures. And I'm talking about countywide too, not just within the Indian child welfare workers, but countywide, because I understand there's legalities and all that, but it just takes too much time. Time is of the essence when we're dealing with our kids. The other thing is education is key. And when I talk about education, I go back to the grandparents, because like Farron said, he's adopted a lot of kids, and I'm a grandparent myself. And a lot of our grandparents or older seniors are now being caregivers or caretakers of children. And a lot of them don't understand the processes, the procedures, the laws, the legalities. They'll just take them in because they want them to be safe and have a safe place to live and know that they're getting their meals like they should be, and that type of thing, going to school. Everything has a domino effect. Everything has a domino effect. So when a child is taken out of the home, are they placed in that same school area or not? Hopefully they are. But if they aren't, then that kid has to go to a different school possibly. Who knows? I mean, it just depends on where the child is placed or where the relative is living or even where the non-relative is living. A lack of foster homes. We lack so many Indian foster homes that it's ridiculous. And we need more foster homes. We need more funding. We need more direct allocations to the tribes that would work, that would help us with that cultural aspect, that would help us with our programs and services that we have, some interventions, some preventions, those types of things. So I think that there's a lot that can be done from not only a tribal standpoint, but also from a state standpoint, a federal standpoint, and even just within families itself. A lot of families don't understand even ICWA. A lot of families don't even understand ICWA, so it's an education process. And, but I do agree, the social workers have high burnout. They need that supportive services for themselves because you kind of have to put yourself in that person's shoes. How would you feel if every day you went to work and had to deal with a crisis, or every other day you had to deal with a crisis with a child, and you had to pull that child from that home and they're kicking and screaming? I mean, how long could you work in that job, really? How long could you work in that job to do that? Where there might be a simple fix, who knows? Every situation is different. But it just has to be somehow modified or simplified, I guess, because right now it's not working.
Okay, yeah, I just gotta go last year, but yeah, but what Lori and Cathy said, you know, is right on the mark. You know, our kids, our families, our young moms and fathers, you know, they need more support base too, as well, to be successful. That the system that we're kind of operating under now is kind of, it's been failing. I hate to say that word, it's failing. So we have a lot of room for improvement there, you know, and nobody's really pointing fingers at anybody, but how can we get a better handle of this all together, you know, as we work together in that cohesive way. You know, you talk about the rights of the foster parents. You talk about the rights of the biological parents in the caseworkers, right? We talk about all that, but bottom line to everything too, we got to think about the rights of the children, the underage children. You know, that's what we're all talking about here, and you very seldom hear anybody talking about the rights of the children. You know, and that's what's so important there. And you know that my two younger brothers now, that they were put into foster care when they were 3 and 4 years old, and back then counties, and this was pre-ICWA, and you know, these counties, I hate to say it, but these counties were very racial towards a lot of Native kids, families back then. We made some steps in the right direction, and I'm happy to say that. But back then, you know, they never even had to tell the parents where their child were at. They never had to establish any supervised visiting rights in any county places where these children were at. And I can attest to that, because I'd seen my mother and father trying to find where our brothers were, and they wouldn't tell them. They wouldn't tell them. They didn't come back home until they were 18 years old. And they found us. And after that, after they found us, they just went their own separate ways. So even though we're biological family members and brothers, we became strangers, like we are today. You know, we missed out on a lot of the family time that deprived children of making that relationship with their parent, the nurturing that needs to happen. You know, it's not there. I'll see my brothers every once in a while now, and we'll just say hi and just go our separate ways. So you know, people shouldn't feel that way about your biological brothers and sisters. It shouldn't be that way. But taking these kids out of these homes and putting them all over and depriving them of their own family. You know, you talk about things that were happening in the boarding school area with the boarding school students having the same principles were applied. And it's not right. So, you know, I know a part of healing is to forgive. You know, you want to heal and you want to be healthy again and move forward, so you have to forgive. And that's what Native people try to do every day. You know, you try to, sometimes you try to forget about the past, but you can't. Because then you don't learn anything as you move forward.
If I could add one more thing, I do want to say that there are a couple ICWA courts on the outside in St. Louis County, I believe, that are in the process. They're newer courts, but it's nice to see judges from St. Louis County and prosecutors and attorneys trying to deal with the Indian Child Welfare Act and having these ICWA courts and getting input from the tribes with regards to it. We had one of the judges come to our tribal court grand opening of our building just to get herself out there and introducing herself and saying, hey, I'm here, I want to learn and I want to know more. So that's been very helpful. It's starting, but it could be more, it could be better.
I'd like to add a comment. First of all, miigwech, Baron, for sharing that. And one of the things that I wanted to elaborate a little bit more on it, when I say culturally specific services, I think it's really important for everyone to know that those ceremonies begin at conception right away with our babies. And those ceremonies go throughout a lifetime. From the time we take our first breath until we take our last, there are ceremonies all along that way. And when we don't have access and we don't have those resources, that is what Farron is referring to is those are our babies' human rights. That's our children's rights to have access to their language, their songs, their ceremonies, their identity. All of those things, if they have those things, when for an example, if you go through your rites of passage ceremony without getting into the depths of that ceremony, you'll learn how to have healthy relationships. That prevents domestic violence. You learn about self-respect. You learn about your identity and who you are, what clan you are. That helps deter away from gangs. When you learn how to take care and be good stewards to the land, you're providing for your community, you're bringing wild rice and maple syrup and fish back to your community, you're feeding your family, and you're feeding yourself. And that's our natural sustainability. And so when you think about a lifelong ceremonies all throughout, that gives us everything that we need to live good, healthy lifestyles in ways. And when we think about that prevention work, how do we prevent trauma? How do we prevent child protection? How do we prevent neglect? How do we prevent addictions? It's at the prevention side of things. So when I say it's really critically important that we have revitalization of language efforts, that is to ensure and protect our culture, our ceremonies that uses our language, that is part of our songs. And those ceremonies and those songs will guide us throughout our lifetime. And that's where that true upstream prevention work really is. And we'll see that change within these 7 generations of moving forward, and that's how we protect it. In land, you talk about land, that is so connected to our children and so important to our children because that's our place of where we go. That's where we get our medicines. Yep. That's where we get our food. So, I mean, when we talk about how can we all help, it's to be mindful that it's not in just the area of child welfare. It is public safety, it is lands, it is roads, it is everything in between and all around. And one thing that Chairman Dupuy always says is we're connected with everything and everything that has spirit. And we live our life in that way with our 7 grandfather teachings. Yep. So I just wanted to elaborate on what I mean by culturally specific services and why they're so important to our children and families.
I have a question.
Yes.
Do you know, so are social workers who deal with children in out-of-home placements, are they required to be trained in ICWA? And are judges, family law judges who preside over cases required to be trained in ICWA?
No, they're
And maybe
not.
that's something, I know nobody likes mandates, but I think that's maybe something we ought to look at. Because
Speaker, we're looking at that.
yeah,
We
Yeah,
actually,
great.
we did bring that
I'm not on
forward
any
in that.
committees, so
We did try to get that mandated through the tribal training certification partnership, but I don't think I think the mandated part was removed or taken out, but we would like to pursue mandates of that, not only in Minnesota, but also if it was in the education system at a national level, it would protect our children throughout the United States as well. And legal. Thank you,
Could I respond to that? A Aloha, my name is Jill Ash. I am the ombudsperson with the Office of Ombudsperson for American Indian Families, the only state agency of its kind in the nation. Thank you very much for the legislature for creating this in 2021. I have a couple of my board members here. But in answer to your question, I was at a training last month in February. Carlton County set up a 3-day training with the county and with the tribes. And it was very sad, on the last day of training, you had a number of Fond du Lac people there. We were paired up into groups of 5. There was only one county person in the entire room. And the purpose of that was to have the conversations for the tribes and the county talking together. You had 4 groups that the tribes were talking among themselves. So this is something that I will be contacting their commissioner to find out. The judge was there for the 3 days. With my schedule, I was only able to make it out there for 2 of the 3 days. But the fact that you had this all set up and had been set up for months, one county social worker in a room, and you had almost everyone from Fond du Lac there with that. So what I'm saying is you have this, it is set up, the purpose of it. And what I heard was Carlton County said they have too much training. So I just wanted to just share that. It is there, but it's a matter of us trying to speak with their leadership. And their leadership needs to require them to be in the seats and listening, not on their phone. Because that's the other thing that's happening. I've been to ICWA trainings around the state, and there's only one of me. I'm an agency of 1. Minnesota is number 1 in the nation for the removal of American Indian children. When I come into a room and there's ICWA training, and you're talking CJI ICWA training, where you have judges up there, but the social workers are on their telephone or on their Amazon shopping. Okay? Talk about being disrespectful with that, so I just wanted to share. Thank you.
She's right, though.
Is there any final remarks as we've hit our 45-minute mark? I'll give you guys the opportunity for final remarks and maybe one more question if there is one.
Go ahead.
I'd say, miigwech, bizendawyeg, meet you. So thank you very much for listening to me today. I think my whole comment about culture and the importance of that being our children's right would be my final comment. So miigwech, thank you.
I just want to say, Chimegwich for the MIFPA being passed and strengthening Minnesota's stand on MIFPA. I'm very scared about the Supreme Court because that also deals with tribal sovereignty. I don't know what they'll do, but it's scary for tribes right now. I do want to commend Lori here. Lori has been a huge advocate for ICWA. I've known Lori for many years now, and she served on the Indian Child Welfare Advisory Board for quite some time. And she's the voice. She's the expert, and she knows what she's talking about. And she's adamant about it, and the passion in her heart is into it. And I just want to say Chimegwich to her as well, because we need more people like Lori to speak up. And so I'm very proud of her. Chimegwich for having us here today.
Okay, yeah. All right, I think, yeah, thanks, Cathy. Yeah, I agree, I agree with you. Lori's been on top of everything here too, and she's kind of really, she's passionate what she does, and we're very thankful in our Indian communities to have Lori at the front lines. But it's also good to see Melissa here today as a discussion here, and without a gavel in her hand too. It's kind of, I know she's out. It's good though, but yeah, these things are good to just openly talk about. And, you know, like I said, it's not about pointing fingers or blaming anybody, but, you know, we acknowledge that there's work that needs to be done. You know, we had talked with the DHS commissioner too about how we can help some of these counties, especially in Cass County, where they've been out of compliance in the last 3 years in a row. And we had offered help, assistance, because we meet with them in our joint meetings too. You know, very good folks, but we've always stated if there's something that you don't understand or you need help with getting our ICWA out in compliance in Cass County, Leech Lake will be here to help you. You know, where we've extended our hand out. So we just want these counties to know the importance of this law and what it signifies. You know, when you're talking about one of the greatest resources we all have, native and non-native, are our children. You know, they're the greatest resources we have here. And in all our children, we talk about a lot of problems we all face, you know, but a lot of our children, these babies, they have a right to be born healthy. They have a right to have a good start in life, like a lot of us have. You know, that's their right. And so we have to work hard to make sure that we protect the rights of these children, you know, as they're growing up in life. So it has long-lasting life effects for a lot of these young kids, you know, and they remember, you know, the way they were treated. And we want that always to be in a good, respectful way. Oh, good.
Thank you all so much for participating in the panel, and thank you all for joining us today. I think we are headed back to the House chambers for the closing ceremonies.
Already?